We're so glad that you're here, and thank you all for supporting the museum. Before we get started, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ebey's Reserve and the Friends of Ebey's, for helping to make this possible. But I have the great pleasure to introduce to you Patrick Hussey, who is one of our docents here at the museum, and he's a great font of knowledge. So give it up for Patrick.
Thank you. So I recognize a bunch of people. Are you folks from around here, this group here? Are we all like Whitby people here, or Whitby? We're all Whitby people?
Welcome. You're from Hawaii.
All right. Just checking in. I like to check in. So I am a fifth generation Washingtonian. I'll get into that a little bit later. I was born in Anacortes in 1950. Dad was a Navy pilot in NAS Whitby, World War II. So I'm not going to talk about a little bit about Penn Cove, since you probably already know all about it. I do want to mention one thing, though, that you might have heard about, which I think is important, is, and I'm going to get into my topic, don't worry, but this cove, of course, was the ancestral home of the lower Skagit of the Coast Salish, and they had 3, 4, 5, I don't know how many longhouse villages, permanent villages here, one of which is right here. And it was very interesting because last week when they were digging up the sidewalk infrastructure, lo and behold, and you may have heard about this, they ran into a shell midden. A shell midden is a typical debris ground of shells, probably a lot of mussel shells, clam shells, animal bones. They ran into it, and of course everything had to stop immediately because that's a very culturally significant thing. And so the tribal people were called down. They brought in professional archaeologists, and it was determined that the midden had been disturbed a long time ago. It was all broken up and everything. But they had to, that's why they took the trees down, because the middens was encased in and around these trees, so the trees had to go. And then I noticed the other day that there were people down there with wire screens, so they're shifting through the dirt, because the remnants of the midden will be collected and turned over to the tribes for replacement elsewhere. There are middens out here, but they don't tell you, they don't want to know, they don't want people to know where they are, because they'll be disturbed. So
We're told that there were no bones in it.
yes, there was a rumor that there were human bones, and Mayor Molly sent out a large email on that saying no, that's not correct. So I'm going to talk today about the Crockett's, the Crockett pioneer family. And, okay, just up front, this is not Davy Crockett, okay? Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, killed me a bear when I was only 3. That was Tennessee Crockett's. These Crockett's were from Virginia, long-time Virginia farmers, way back. And Grandpa Hugh Crockett was actually in the Revolutionary War, and his son was Walter, and Walter Crockett lived in Virginia on the family farm, which they had had for generations, and he had 4 sons. His oldest son, who I'm going to be focusing on more than the other guys, was Samuel Black Crockett. And the reason I like to talk about the Crockett's is because Samuel Black Crockett, as a young 24-year-old man, was a compatriot of my third great-grandparents. My third great-grandparents were Michael Troutman Simmons and his wife Elizabeth Kindred Simmons. And Samuel Black Crockett joined them on the Oregon Trail in 1844, going out to west. Preceding that Walter Crockett, his father and mother, decided it's time to go west. If we're going to leave Virginia after all these generations, we're going to go west. West meant Missouri. We're going to go west to Missouri. So they traveled to Missouri. They set up a homestead in Missouri. And this was in 1838. Samuel Black Crockett, the oldest son, was born in 1820. And so in 1838, they traveled west from Virginia to Missouri and set up a homestead in Missouri. And they got to Missouri, and the family lore is that Walter Cronkite, the Colonel Crockett, Walter, was very happy with Missouri. We're west. Hey, we made it. We're west. And his oldest son Samuel said, "No, we're not. We're not west." He was itching to go further. Samuel Black Crockett wanted to come out to the Pacific Northwest, and Walter, his father, said, "I don't think so. We're good here. Why would you want to go that way?" But he insisted. He supported his son, and so Samuel Black Crockett connected with my third great grandparents, who were also in Missouri, heading west across the Oregon Trail. And I just want to sidebar. I'm honored to have here today, in case you don't know her, one of Coopville's preeminent historians right here. Judy Lynn is here, and Judy is incredible. She's written a book about Coopville. It's in the store. If you're nice to her, she might even sign the book. She's also done oral histories.
I'm looking for Morgan.
Close to, how about, 150 so far, Judy?
172.
They're absolutely fascinating. Of all, you want to know about Coopville, all the history of Coopville, going way back, read Judy's oral histories. You can download them, get them on your e-reader. They're fascinating. Also, so thank you for being here, Judy.
Thank you.
You're a good friend.
Thank you.
So, anyway, so off we go on the Oregon Trail with what our family calls him, Michael T. Michael T. and his family. Now, Michael T. is probably 35. Samuel Black Crockett is 24. He's a young man. They had a number of bachelors on that train. And off they go, leaving, Independence, basically, all the way out here. That's a 6-month journey. And like I tell the kids when they come in here, talk to the students, they're walking. I mean, even the kids were walking. And primarily oxen were driving the wagons. These were not, these were called prairie schooners because they were farm wagons with a big oiled canvas sheet over them. They weren't those long wagons you see in John Wayne movies. They're different, they're prairie schooners. And so they made their way slowly, 6 months, over the Oregon Trail. And what's super interesting is the only Winfield Ebey kept a journal of his travels, but the only journal diary kept on this journey, which was in 1844, was by Samuel Black Crockett in handwritten script. And it's at the Washington State Historical Society, and they were kind enough to send me by PDF. I have it. It's difficult to read, but there's a transcript of it. And in this journal, Samuel Black is very specific, very detailed about what he saw, what he did, the travails of being there, the encounters with some of the Native Americans, how they conducted themselves as they traveled for 6 months across the Oregon Trail. So they get to eventually cross the Columbia, which is on barges, extremely dangerous. They were helped significantly once they got out here by the Nisqually tribe. What happened, one of the leaders of this train, wagon train, was a gentleman by the name of George Bush. George Bush was mulatto, and George Bush had been out to the Pacific Northwest earlier, like in the 1840s, 1839. He'd been out here before. He was a very successful farmer in Missouri. Lore had it that his wagon had quite a bit of money in it, and he was very generous in terms of helping the other pioneers make this arduous journey. What happened though, they were all intending to go to the Willamette Valley because that's where everybody else was going. At that time, north of the Columbia, there were not any American settlers north of the Columbia. You had the Hudson Bay colonies up there, you had some forts up there, you had fur trappers, but there was no settlers up there. But once they got out here, George Bush was informed that because of the color of his skin, he would not be allowed to have a land claim in the Willamette Valley. And so the wagon train split up. Michael T. was a really good friend of George Bush, and so Michael T. and his group, George Bush and his group, Samuel Black Crockett with Michael T., very close to Michael T., said, okay, we're going to cross the Columbia. We're going to go across the Columbia. We're going to go into this territory that no one else has settled in. And they did. And so they spent a winter along the shores of the Columbia. They probably would have perished, but for the help of the Nisquallies, who showed them how to harvest clams, how to pick berries, and also with the help of the factor there at the fort, Dr. McLaughlin, who employed them cutting, making cedar shingles, etc., and helping them out with various supplies. So they wintered there. This is in the winter of 1844. Amazingly, my third great grandmother, Elizabeth Kindred, was pregnant for the last 3 months of her journey across the Oregon Trail, and she had a son on the north side of the Columbia, and they named him Christopher Columbus Simmons. And my second great grandfather, and it was quite an event, his birth. The natives were fascinated by this little white kid, little white baby, and in his later life he had a shocking amount of white hair, and the natives called him Kickapoo, seagull, and he lived a long, long, long time. So anyway, they're there that winter, and eventually they decide to head north, and very interestingly, Michael T. And Samuel hired, because that's how you get around, not sure which tribe, probably Nisquallies, and they came up here. Canoed around Whidbey, canoed around the area, checking out places to settle. And eventually, Michael T., who was a miller, decided that the perfect place would be at the Deschutes River Falls of Bud Inlet, where, if you've been there, where the old Olympia Brewery is, that Deschutes River flows south, and it's very strong. It's very strong water power, and so they decided to settle there because he could use water power. He built the first grist mill with water power with Samuel Crockett's help. And the first sawmill was down there in Tumwater. They didn't call it Tumwater, they called it New Market. And they called it New Market because of the fact that the fort nearby was a market, and so they said, we're Americans, it's New Market. And so that's where they landed. This was not an easy trek from essentially a little bit on the banks of the Columbia up the Cowlitz River. It was thick, heavy, wooded, rain, and mud. And 30 miles slogging through this stuff with, you know, the women and the kids, and getting up there. By the time, there's journal entries, by the time they got to the Deschutes River Falls, they were all tattered and worn out and so tired and hungry. But, you know, they started cutting trees down, building little cabins, building little houses, and that eventually became Tumwater. So, what happened is after Crockett, remember at this time, the rest of the Crockett's had stayed back in Missouri. And Samuel Black Crockett was a very good friend of Isaac Ebey back in Missouri. Isaac, by that time, had been admitted to the Missouri bar. He was a lawyer. The Ebeys were a very big family. His parents were still alive, Jacob and Sarah. He had a lot of kids, and Isaac was a pretty prominent figure back in Missouri, and Samuel and Isaac were very close, and Samuel wrote letters to Isaac giving him glowing reports about the Pacific Northwest and how beautiful it was and all the abundance of natural resources, and he's just got to come out here. Now, when you say he wrote letters, okay, letters. So, I mean, letters would take from the Pacific Northwest to Missouri 2 to 3 months to get the letter. Because he either had to go, are you going back to Missouri? Okay, can you take this letter? Or it would, you know, come around the other way. I mean, it'd take a long, long time. So there's instances where, you know, people are writing letters that about, well, why don't you come out? And they've already left. So, but there were a lot of letters that Samuel wrote Isaac. They were quite close. And so, as you probably know, the story of Isaac is he decides, I'm going to make the trek out to the Pacific Northwest. And at that point, you know, he had a young family, Rebecca, his 2 young sons, Eason and Ellison, his parents, and he had 3 siblings, Winfield, Mary, and Sarah. But he went by himself, and Isaac came over the Oregon Trail, and a little sidebar, interesting, his second wife was also on that train. That's where he met her. But anyway, he ended up here in this territory. He came and wintered in the Olympia area in the winter of 1849. And both him and Samuel, that's when the California Gold Rush hit. And so there's a wonderful book that I want to read a quote from, that some of you may be familiar with. I have given, both in wearing my hat here as a docent here at the museum, I'm also a National Park Service volunteer out at the Ebey House, the Jake and Sarah Ebey House. I have talked to literally hundreds of people about the Ebeys, Isaac, Rebecca, their sons, Mary, my friend Lee James is here. Lee, you've been living in Coopville since when? 1863? 1885. Yeah, 1885. So Lee and I do, Lee's taught me so much. We've been doing the cemetery tours. And of course the Ebeys are there. We talk a lot about the Ebeys. But the Ebeys, for me, came to life in this book. This book, The Ghosts of Whidbey Island, by this Victoria Ventress Shea. She's here, retired school teacher, and it's just a marvelous book. And it really brings to life. It's very, very historically based. She did tremendous deep dive research on this book. And
Thank you.
but then she has dialogue. It's historical fiction, so she has people talking to each other. So here we go. This is in October of 1848. On a brisk October day, Ebey had just arrived. Ebey finds his best friend, Samuel Crockett, splitting firewood at his cabin on a claim just south of Bud's Inlet, what I just talked about, with the Sioux River Falls, Tumwater. He looks different, a bit older, cheeks a bit sunken, and very tan. "Brother," Samuel says, seeing him. He lays a heavy arm across Ebey's shoulders, then pulls back for a good look. "I'd say married life agrees with you. Not sure pioneer life agrees with you," Ebey pounds him on the back. "Though you have bulked up a bit, at least your beard is trim. Are you courting someone?" "No, nobody to court, and that's okay. And I'm pretty busy just feeding myself. The beard's trimmed because of summer weather, but that's over now, so no promises. Say, did you hear? We're a territory now, not Oregon country anymore, all the way from the crest of the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. As Oregon territory, we're ready to participate in the benefits of being governed." Ebey rubs his hands together. "When did that happen?" "August, just got the word. In the cabin, they talk long into the night, like brothers sometimes do. Samuel tells him that Sylvester's friend Smith died in August, an epileptic seizure sending him out of his canoe to drown. Sylvester has named their little settlement Smithfield, which became Olympia, in Smith's memory, Samuel says. Sylvester works at Simmons's, Michael T., mill now and cuts shingles to send to Nisqually, but he's planning to head out to California soon, to look for gold. Let us go too, Ebey says, grinning. Don't you want to lay low for a time, take a rest? Samuel asks. No, Ebey says. I want to make every minute count, that I'm always from my family. Let's find a big load of gold and build a couple of houses and get our families over here. Yeah, it's been a long time since we've seen him, Samuel says, but I want you to meet Simmons at New Market first. He's someone you should know. At New Market, Ebey meets tall, burly Michael Troutman Simmons, the epitome of a pioneer, always looking forward. His grist mill is producing coarse flour thanks to Samuel's know-how to use metal parts from a wagon to work the stone wheel. I'm starting up a sawmill too, Simmons says, wiping his face with his kerchief from his pocket. Been working on it since I saw an old upright saw for sale at Fort Nisqually. I'm mighty pleased to meet you, Ebey, especially since you are a friend of Samuel's and a lawyer too. It looks like you are establishing a nice little community here, Mr. Simmons, Ebey says. Thank you. It is, yes, but I got a beef with Doc told me at Fort Nisqually, he says. Only his eyes show above a bearded face, blonde curls. I think that's not correct. I don't think he has blonde. Blonde curls sticking out of his stocking cap like a porcupine quill. I got no patience for details or paperwork. Samuel knows what's going on. Maybe you could help us find out. And so they go on. So this is a really fascinating read to see these people talking to each other. Brings them more to life. And so off they go, Isaac and Samuel, to California. Of course, that doesn't work. By the time they get there, it's all panned out. There's no more gold to be had. So they come back. And that's when Isaac heads up to Whidbey Island. And as all of you know, he made a Donation Land Act claim in October of 1850. That square mile out there, 640 acres, which is really something because he was able to do 320 and on behalf of Rebecca, his wife, who was still back in Missouri, 320. That was the first time ever in American history that a title, ownership, potential fee title could go to a woman. That was the first time ever that ever happened. And so, then of course, as we do know, Rebecca, the two sons, her two brothers, the Davis, or three brothers, the Davises, that's why that blockhouse out there at Sunnyside is a Davis blockhouse. That's Rebecca's brothers built that, and it's the only of the 4 blockhouses on the reserve. That's the only one that has a chimney in it, because a fireplace, because they actually lived in it for a while. That's the Davis blockhouse. And so her brothers came with her, and also with them was Colonel Walter Crockett, Samuel's father, and the 4 brothers. So you got the 4 brothers, you, John, and Charles, coming out with their father and their mother, and they come out with Rebecca, and they come all the way out here, another long, arduous journey, and come out here. And of course, as I said, by that time, Isaac has made a Donation Land Act claim, and then the Crockett's are here in 1851, very early, and they make claims. Thus, Crockett Lake. So Colonel Walter Crockett's claim is where the remaining Crockett blockhouse is. And he actually built 2 blockhouses during what was called the Indian Wars of 1857. Side note, there never were any skirmishes here between the Native Americans, the Lower Skagit, and the settlers, but there were some very bloody conflicts east of the mountains involving the Yakimas, and also the Duwamish were involved to some extent. So it was quite a nervous period of time. The other reason it was nervous was because young Isaac Stevens, Governor Isaac Stevens, who was the first territorial governor of the Washington Territory, was mandated by the administration in Washington, D.C. to make treaties. So he went on a whirlwind tour throughout the Northwest, conducting treaty councils that were with the various tribes. The one that was applicable here was the Treaty of Point Elliott out there at Mukilteo. It's called Rose Point, by Captain George Vancouver, because of the Nuka roses, which are still blooming there. It's called Point Wilson now, not Point Wilson, it's called Mukilteo, because that's a Native American name. Anyway, they had a treaty council there attended by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tribal people. That was one of many treaties that Isaac Stevens put together, and guess what? His right-hand man was none other than Michael Troutman Simmons. Simmons was very familiar with the tribes, spoke not just Chinook, which was the sort of trade jargon, but spoke a lot of their language. He was a trusted friend, but he was also dispatched by Stevens to arrange for these tribal chiefs to come to these, what they called councils, and enter into these treaties. So the story is told that Stevens dispatched Simmons to go see Chief Seattle down to Duwamish to see what is on that chief's mind, what could be done. So Simmons went down there. Chief Seattle wouldn't meet with him. He sent out a young lieutenant to meet with him, and Simmons inquired, well, what does Chief Seattle want? And was informed, well, what Chief Seattle wants is from the Duwamish River north to the, what's now the Canadian-Washington border, then east to the Cascade Crest, then across to the Olympic Peninsula. That's what Chief Seattle wants. And Simmons said, well, that could be a problem. So eventually, Chief Seattle did attend the Treaty Council at Mukilteo, Point Elliott. It's called Point Elliott because the American explorer Charles Wilkes renamed a lot of things, and he renamed it Point Elliott. If you've ever been up to the Hillbulb Cultural Center in Marysville, which is the cultural center of the Tulalipes, it's incredible. And several years ago, I think it's left by now, I'm not sure, the original Treaty of Point Elliott came by armored car across from the National Archives in D.C. for display in the Hillbulb Cultural Center.
Wow.
It was the original documents with some exceptions. There's some pages are so fragile that they were facsimiles, but it was mostly the original treaty. They did a beautiful exhibit about the treaty, about the difficulty of the tribes to understand what the treaty said, because the translator was translating the English to Chinook. Chinook was very limited in terms of their understanding of it, but you have the treaty itself being signed. Michael T. signed it. You have the translator sign it. Isaac Stevens signed it. And then you have all the tribal chiefs and sub-chiefs with just X's. And even though there's quite a bit of misunderstanding as to what its intent and import was in terms of creating reservations and leaving their homelands, many of you will remember the treaty fishing decision by Judge George Bolt decision. That was based on the Point Elliott Treaty. It's the language of the Point Elliott Treaty. And the federal judge determined that the tribes had 50% treaty fishing rights based on the language of that treaty. So the treaty did ultimately provide that source to the tribe. And it was obviously, for those who were around then, and it was very contentious, and it had to be enforced. In other words, shortly after the decision came down and survived on appeal, the treaty fishermen were fishing out near Gedney Island, or Hat Island out there, and the local residents came down with rifles and very threatening and aggressive, and so the U.S. Marshals were called in and put it into that, because this was a federal right that they had. So anyway, so Michael T. was instrumental in securing these treaties. He was the Indian agent in charge of the whole territory. There were sub-agents, like the agent here in Coopville was Captain Robert Fay, whose position was over. It was moved, and where it's located today is Point Defiance State Park outside Tacoma. So that blockhouse was then moved, restored by WPA back in the 30s, and moved up to the road, so be more available for people to, see and learn about. You are on many of you know, you're on the Alexander farm, thus the Alexander blockhouse, and this claim went from the edge of the water all the way south of here. Next to Alexander was Thomas Marie Coop. On that side of Main Street, next to them was Captain Lovejoy. So the three of them, Lovejoy, Coop, and Alexander, this is where their claims were. So Walter was there. Samuel's claim was, if you know where Wanamaker Road is, if you're like going down to Keystone, and you go straight and turn to Keystone Spit, there's Wanamaker Road. There's a house there on the corner right there that until about 4 or 5 years ago looked like it was falling apart, and a couple of guys bought it and they fixed it all up. They gussy it all up at Christmas time. It's absolutely beautiful. That was the old Samuel Hancock site of the house. The house burned down significantly, but the chimney is evidently the chimney is the remaining chimney. Now, it's Wanamaker because the Wanamakers were, Irene Wanamaker was quite a Coopville VIP, and my friends own the single level beautiful house right there on Wanamaker Road, which when that was built in the 60s, Irene was very proud of it because it has big, beautiful bay windows, and you can look out onto Crockett Lake. And it actually was featured in Sunset Magazine because it was so beautiful house on the prairie. So Samuel always kind of had an itch to him. And in later years, in the late 1800s, even though his parents were here and his brothers were here who made separate land claims, Samuel left Whidbey Island, and he moved to Hood River, Oregon, and he started apple orchards in Hood River, and that's where he lived the rest of his life. Married Matilda, and that's where they lived for many, many years in Hood River. He eventually, when he died in 1903, he's buried in Seattle at the this cemetery, the Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Seattle. Yeah, he died in November of 1903. He died in Kent, Washington. So this is Samuel's monument down at the cemetery in Seattle. Because you think, oh, he'd be up there in Sunnyside with the rest of them. Well, he's not. Down in Kent. Now, the other Crockett's are definitely up there. So this is kind of a view of the Crockett plot up there at Sunnyside. Walter's up there, his wife, some of the sons are up there. And Walter has the distinction up at that cemetery of being one of the oldest people in terms of his birth. He was born January 1786 at the Roanoke Farm in Virginia. And Mary was born in February of 1798, and she died in 1885. And so this is their monument up there. It's a beautiful monument. And like a lot of plots up there, there's a monument, and that's not where they're buried. It's sort of just saying, this is our plot, and then you'll see within the plot, you'll see smaller stones, like either a headstone, sometimes a footstone. There's a headstone and a footstone. And with some exceptions up there, all those headstones are facing east, and there's a reason for that. They're facing east because the tradition is that on the last day of judgment, they'll be able to stand up and face their final judgment when that happens. They'll rise east. And so that's quite interesting. The whole cemetery is interesting.
I just heard that Frank Pratt's is not facing east.
There's a couple of exceptions. Frank Pratt, like Judy says, is not facing east.
No, he's not.
He's facing towards the water, and he's also at quite a distance from Lena and Robert. They're down this way. There's all sorts of theories of why that's the case.
Why is it?
Well, as you may know, Robert and Lee can talk about this much better than I can. Robert, his son, and Frank had a very complicated, difficult relationship. to say the least. Frank, notwithstanding what he and Lena and his first wife did in terms of preservation and the suva and protecting everything and preserving it, and then Robert picked up the mantle and did it himself. It was a very complicated family, and there's reasons that they didn't want him near Robert. So that's how things work sometimes, as you know. I'll go back to my notes here. I am indebted not only to Judy and her work, and Lee, and Dalva, and the ladies here at the museum that run this place. It's incredible. Not only indebted to Victoria's book, but many of you probably are aware of this book, Jimmy Jean Cook's book, Particular Friend. This is like the Bible. I mean, this has everything in it, and it's just incredible. And she worked at the auditor's office, right, Judy? I think for like 25 years.
She was my grandparents' next door neighbor, and my grandfather always, Mr. Parker, Shirley Parker, always wanted the license plate with all zeros. That's the bottom of the stack. So when it's time for his license plate, she'd have to tell Grandpa, now it's time to come and get your license plate. But yeah, so I have a first edition. She autographed it to me or whatever. Wow. So yeah.
Oh, very cool. So Lee has a very good friend, Ron Van Dyke, who's about to celebrate his 90th birthday. Is that right, Lee? 90, Ron, yes. Turning 90?
Yes.
Yeah,
Sunday.
okay. And he lives in the Captain Clapp house, and that is like full of so much stuff. And the last time I was in, it relates to Jimmy Jean Cook, last time I was in there, Ron says, well, Patrick, see this desk here? This desk here? That's Jimmy Jean Cook's writing desk. I said, oh my God, really? So, I mean, that stuff is just floating around, like out at the Engel house that Lynn Hyde's working on to restore with the daughters, Dave Engel's daughters. Flora's desk apparently is up there, Flora Augusta Pearson Engel. And speaking of Flora, which, you know, one of my favorites, she has a quote about Samuel. It's kind of interesting. Let's see. So Flora P. Engel remembered him, that's Samuel Black Crockett, as she saw him and wrote, quote, he was short and stooped from hard work, and his legs were inclined to be bowed. With a bell-crowned hat, half-high hat on his head, and an antique blue cape over his shoulders, he made a quaint picture. And, you know, Samuel did live a very long life. I mean, I think he was 83 years old when he passed. I'll mention just a few things about Samuel's brothers, because they were here too. So there was Hugh Crockett, who lived here. He was actually the first sheriff of this county. Charles Crockett, his land claim, I know a lot of you know Dr. Kellogg, John Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg's first land claim was he owned or claimed that Admiralty Head, where the old Red Bluff Lighthouse was, and where the new lighthouse, 1902 lighthouse. And Dr. Kellogg, that's where his claim was. If you know where the restrooms are, next to the parking lot, there's kind of a wooded area. According to my friend Stephen Koblik, who knows everything about that fort, that's where Dr. Kellogg's first house was. But Dr. Kellogg's wife hated it there. She didn't like it there. She didn't like being in the woods. So Kellogg was quite you know, as a doctor, canoe doctor they called him, and had enough funds. So he built a beautiful house out on Smith Prairie, where OLF is. So the house was like, we turn on Patmore, the house was out there, at the Kellogg House. And I belong to the Coopville Lions Club. And every year we invite the base commander from NAS Whitby to come down and give us a, talk about this, the base and what's happening and stuff. And so the guy did a pretty good job. He's like, seemed like he was like 18 years old. He did very well. But the first guy came, I mean, they switched commanders. One of the guys came, he couldn't understand a word he said. It was all like military acronyms and stuff. This guy was from Louisiana, very plain spoken, very easy to understand. Any questions? I said, yes, sir. I'm like a history guy, and you may know this, but Dr. John Kellogg built a beautiful house out there, Smith Prairie, where your OLF is. And I was just wondering, would it be possible to, I'd like to go out there. Because Al Sherman, when he was alive, that whole family was involved in that house. And he said, well, like you talk to my public relations guy here, and talk to them, and we can work something out. So I did, and so I was told, absolutely not. You will not be permitted to go out there. But she was great. She's the Cultural Affairs Naval Officer, Cultural Affairs Office for the base, and she said, I got some you might like, and she sent me this incredible deep dive report that the Navy had commissioned probably 15, 20 years ago on every single piece of property that the Navy owns. They own a lot of different parcels on Whidbey Island. They did a deep dive title report, cultural report, it's probably 150 pages long. So she sent me that, which is really, really super interesting to read. I have it in PDF. So I'm gonna, I want to finish with the rest of the Crockett brothers. So I talked about talked about Charles. There was also Walter Jr. Walter Jr. Lived with his parents, never married, took care of them in their later years. And then there's John, and John Crockett. What John Crockett's famous for is when Isaac died, or not died, when he was murdered. There was a burial at the farm. There wasn't. Mary Bozard Ebey, his older sister, had not set up the Ebey graveyard yet. So all the Ebeys, like Sarah, Jacob, Isaac, Rebecca, they're all buried down in the farm. That's what farm families did. And so there was a very sad and horrible burial. And what John Crockett is unfortunately famous for is the coffin he built for Isaac was too small. They couldn't get the body into it. So the whole thing had to be delayed while they, quickly extended the coffin for poor Isaac. But I get a lot of questions about that horrible incident. And I'll conclude by telling you what I tell visitors, which is there's a sequel to that, which is about that murder took place in August of 1857, and about 150 years later, Michael Ferry, who was very involved in the museum, I think he was at the front desk, gets a call from the Cultural Affairs Office of the tribe up in Cape Alaska, the northern Indians that came down and found Isaac. And they said, hey, we'd like to come down and go out to the cabins, which are long gone, where, Isaac was killed. And Michael said, of course. And then he put him in touch with Rick, who was then the executive director. And Rick says, well, when would you like to come do this? And they said, how about August 11th? Well, unknowing that August 11th was the exact day, August 11th, 1857. So they came down, several elders came. They went out to the site. I wasn't there. You, Judy, you were there. I think Lynn was there. Rick was there. Michael, I think, was there. I don't know. Lee, were you there? Were
They
you there?
stopped at the Jacob Ebey house too.
Yeah, they stopped at the Jacob. Were you there, Judy, when they stopped in?
Yep.
Yeah, and so it was one of those things, you know, Native American ceremonies, you know, there's no filming, there's no photographing, there's no nothing. We don't do it. And so, but we do have the oral recollections of people that were there. And it was one of those ceremonies where it was like, well, look, this happened 150 years ago. We can't change what happened. We're here today. And so they did visit the Jacob and Sarah Ebey house.
And they said, we come in peace.
We come in peace. And Michael and his partner Jim Sherman have a beautiful home out on Madrona Drive. And they went out there, they hosted them for a really nice dinner. And so it's a beautiful thing. I always try to tell people that, because that's kind of a, you know, a sequel to that horrible incident. So it is now 3 o'clock, or close to 3. And I know Judy, you have some burning questions.
I just want to throw something in, because for years, the Haida Indians were
Yeah.
accused
Yeah.
of murdering him, and it was the Cake Indians.
Yeah, it was,
And they're-
it's Klinglet.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right,
from Cape, Alaska.
that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
They're the ones that came down.
And you may know this, Lynn Hyde with Historic Whitby, also known as Haller House, among other things. She is planning to go up there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she told me that, yeah.
She wants to go up there this summer.
She just needs some money to get there.
Needs some money to get there. And she wants to, you know, sit down and see if they will talk into her tape recorder to get the best recollections that have been passed down over the generations as to, you know, what happened.
Patrick, my understanding when they came down that time was that their oral history was very much in tune with our history.
Oh, okay, really, that's good. Yeah, because we have some contemporaneous accounts by, you know, William Ingle, Thomas Hasty, Corliss, Sheriff Marshal Corliss that was in the house.
Yeah, there were several.
Several contemporaneous recollections of what happened that horrible night. So, yeah, well, that's interesting, and so I hope Lynn is able to do that.
Me too. I'd like to know more about the Crockett's and what you mentioned one of them was our first sheriff. What did the others do?
Well, the others, let's see if I have notes on that, Judy. I believe it was Charles that had the claim next to, out on Admiralty Head near the old Kellogg claim. He was a hermit. He was a recluse. No one knew much about him. In fact,
Like Lena.
Jimmy Jean says he eventually killed himself. So there was not much known about him.
Okay.
Now Walter Jr., as I mentioned, lived with his parents his whole life, never married, took care of his parents,
Okay.
and then inherited that farm, and then it's passed down through the generations.
And were they farmers?
They were farmers. They were definitely farmers, and they had to be farmers at that property. It wasn't like Ebey. It wasn't on a prairie. They had to log it. And Walter talks about bracken fern that are 3 to 4 feet high, and how it took oxen 2 or 3 days to get the roots out. But had a good crop of wheat and onions and cattle. But you know, they talk about the bracken fern being, you know, massively high. I mean, it was a real problem for farmers that weren't on you know, native prairies like Ebey Prairie or Smith Prairie.
Thank you.
Lee, question?
I'd like to comment about Hugh Crockett in Puyallup.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, one of the questions that we always run into around here is what happened to our pioneers eventually? And that's somewhat true of the Crockett's. We traced out Samuel Crockett to Kent, where he's buried. But there's another thing that developed recently, and that's that Hugh Crockett left also. And where he wound up was right next door to Ezra Meeker's hop farm in Puyallup. So the two of them were somewhat known as the founders of Puyallup. They had side-by-side farms. They went to a better crop, you might say, of hops. It was a really hot thing. Lots of money involved with it, a little bit of process, you have to dry it and so forth. Anyway, that's where he lived and died, and today there's a tavern in Puyallup called the Crockett pub or whatever they call it. Yeah, still today. I've checked with them in the Historic Society there, and they did not know about the connection of Hugh Crockett with up here, but they were interested.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. That is
Thank you.
interesting. Yeah.
Oh, is this a question?
Well, I have a question.
Lindy?
What's the story on the return of the scalp or the head or?
I can tell you.
Oh, okay.
Judy, go ahead.
So, well, okay. I don't know, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was a friend of the family, and he went up. My son portrayed him during History Day in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So that's why I know a little bit about it. But he was a guy that went up because he knew where it was. He had to make several trips because he went up and asked for it, and they kept turning him down. And so I think it was the third or fourth trip that he went up there and talked to them about it. And he took blankets and gifts for them, and they finally turned it over. But we don't know what ended up with it. Teresa has researched it, and it seems like it ended up with the Ebey family, but in California. So we don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit onto that. Judy's right on that. So the merchant marine that negotiated Isaac's scalp back, now a scalp,
Yes.
that's skin with hair on it. It's not like a head.
Yeah.
So the scalp was traded back to this fellow, and he actually got a special commendation by the Washington Territorial Legislature for doing that. John Kellogg's grandson, George, wrote a little book, blue and white book, we have it, tons of would-be memories, and in his book, he recites that he was visiting not Mary Bozard Ebey, but Mary's daughter Elmira in the Bay Area, and she brought out the scalp
Oh, really?
for him to look at. He said it chilled me to the bone. But
So
then he
that's
also,
confirmed.
well, that's what he says. And you know how that goes. And so he also notes in a little side footnote, he noted that, and again, we don't know these things. What Judy's talking about, Teresa Trebone was the archivist for the Swinomish for many, many years. She's an incredible historian. She's written a number of books, one about Sunnyside Cemetery, one about the
And she
hospital.
did a lot of oral histories that are up in the reserve.
And a lot of oral history. She's tremendous. But George, in the blue and white book, he notes in a little footnote that his understanding that the scalp made its way back to Sunnyside Cemetery when they exhumed the bodies from the farm, when Mary Bozard Ebey, the oldest sister of Jacob and Sarah, created the Ebey graveyard out of this, about an acre out of the farm, and she had them all exhumed and their bodies brought up, at least Roger Sherman, that's what he would say, brought up to and reburied, that eventually the scalp came to. But you don't know.
We'll find out.
Why? By exhuming the body?
Don't give her any ideas.
Out there at the dead of the night, digging up Isaac Ebey's grave?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they can have photographs. I mean, they have depth finders.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Probably cost a fortune.
You're right. Well, Dalva's saying it's time. So thank you, everyone, and I believe there's, well, you want to say what's left on the next Porch Story, or?
Yeah, sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Second here.